Tonight we're here in the Garage of Terror, bringing you two brand new narrations, including one that has never made an appearance anywhere else. We've also got Squeakers the Slaughtering Squirrel here with your questions, and Aerosmith will be here live performing a cover of Disturbed's cover of Sound of Silence. One of those three things is a lie, but you'll have to stay tuned to find out which one. The answer may surprise you. Welcome to Stories from Beyond the Dark. I've just been informed by our team of lawyers that I'm legally obligated to inform you that the part about Aerosmith performing here live, that was the lie. Nah, I'm just fucking with you. We can't afford lawyers. What we do have, though, is the first of our two narrations for the evening. See, kiddos, that's what we in the business, we call that a segue. In our last episode, a very rare and very dangerous item had come up for auction. The Fatum Machina, an ancient machine that brings with it the possibility of eternal life and bottomless knowledge. Of course, it may also just lead you straight to hell, but no one ever got anywhere in life without taking a few chances, right? The gavel has fallen, the auction is closed, and Trevor Morwood, one of the most powerful and influential men in the world, now has his new prize. Tonight's story follows Mr. Morwood as he meets with a woman that is far more than she seems at a first glance. Their conversation will bring with it revelations with ramifications far beyond the life of one human being, and could bring with it the man's death. On the top floor of one of the tallest buildings in New York City is a restaurant called Parva Mortes. You haven't heard of it. Don't feel bad about that, though. Very few people in the world have. It's a place where only the wealthy can aspire to, and only those with power can obtain. There are only 5 tables in the entirety of the restaurant, and they're arranged in such a way as to ensure total privacy. The Parva Mortes is where the top of the food chain come to indulge themselves while deciding how everything you know will operate. Presidents, prime ministers, and dictators are turned away at the door. No one who has appeared in Forbes or Bloomberg is allowed to book a reservation. The manager has turned down the Pope's request to dine on more than one occasion. Me? I have my own table. I'm not telling you this to brag about my wealth or my status, or that I've acquired both these things in such great amounts in such a way as to avoid the public's gaze. It's quite the opposite, actually. I'm telling you this so that you'll understand just how serious I'm being when I say that the woman sitting at my table frightens me. It seems absurd on the face of it. Lydia is tall but thin. Her blonde hair was cropped short the last time that I saw her, but she has allowed it to grow long. She's wearing a black dress that is fashionable and exudes sexuality. She's a strikingly beautiful woman. That beauty hides her true nature and the true threat that she represents to anyone in her presence. I start to walk towards the table before she sees that I've arrived. I don't want her to know that I'm hesitant. She probably already knows that, but I don't want to give any outward indication of my unease. Every single meeting with her is a veiled back and forth struggle. Showing weakness at the onset would dictate how the entirety of this encounter would go, and it wouldn't be in my favor. She turns and smiles as I sit down in the chair across from hers. I don't return the smile, but I do nod politely. She has taken the seat directly in front of the large floor-to-ceiling window, and her form is framed by the New York night skyline. Well, well, Mr. Morwood, she says, her voice smooth as silk. Has it really been a year already? Indeed it has, I reply, keeping my own voice even and steady. Nice of you to choose this particular restaurant for us to meet at. Nothing but the best for you, Trevor. Especially since I'm the one paying for it, I ask, raising an eyebrow. She smiles again. In the interest of full disclosure, that did happen to cross my mind as I was selecting the location. I see that you brought along your most recent purchase. I set the black box that I'm carrying down on the table next to me. It's never far from me. We both fall silent as a waiter comes up to the table. He stands some distance away from us until I nod at him. The staff at Parva Mortes is the best of the best, and they will never approach unless they are invited to. Good evening, sir, the waiter says with just the right mixture of pleasantness and respect. To you as well, Charles, I tell him. How are your wife and daughter? A handful, sir, just like always. He places his hands behind his back. Would you care to start with a bottle of wine to share with your lovely companion? His lovely companion would certainly like that, Lydia interjects sardonically. I ignore her. Ask Maurice to open a bottle of 1947 Cheval Blanc and have it brought to the table. No need for a testing or tasting. I trust his judgment. Ah, this must be a special night beyond simply being New Year's Eve, Charles says with a nod. I'll ask him to retrieve it from his private stores immediately. He heads towards the kitchen, but instead of going through the doors, he turns right and goes down a side passage. It leads to the wine cellar. Somewhere inside of it is Maurice Laurent, the top sommelier in the world. I have to admit that I don't know much about wine, Lydia says. Did you order a good one? It better be, I answer. A single bottle of it is sold for over $300,000. Oh my, what a big spender. I shrug. This might be my last day alive. If it is, I want to finish it out right. I have to admit that's a good philosophy to have, especially since you may very well be dead in less than 30 minutes. Tell me, Trevor, are you feeling lucky tonight? No more and no less than the previous times. I would have thought that it would be harder for you this time around, with you being closer to what you want than you ever have been. The fact that the pieces are finally falling into place doesn't make you want to cling to life ever so tighter? As I recall, the terms of our deal don't include you becoming my personal therapist. Ah, down to business then. Lydia leans back in her chair and drapes one arm over the back of it. Let's get the formalities out of the way so that we can get right down to the fun part. I know what's coming. It's the same thing that's happened every New Year's Eve for the past 4 years. I still listen intently just in case she has made any seemingly minor tweaks to the arrangement that she hopes I won't catch. Trevor Milton Morwood, she begins. Here's the deal that I'm offering you. It is non-negotiable, and if you accept it, the contract will be binding. You will be given the opportunity to ask me any questions that you have until the stroke of midnight. I will answer those questions truthfully and accurately, without purposely withholding or attempting to conceal information. She holds out her hand and a small gold coin appears in her palm. This isn't some sleight of hand parlor trick. That would be beneath her. It is instead the tiniest of tastes of what she is able to do. In return for answering her questions, she continues, I will flip this coin the moment the ball touches down in Times Square. At that point your time will be at an end, and the coin flip will determine your fate. Heads, you walk out of here and continue on with your life as you see fit. Tails, both your life and soul are forfeit. There will be no interference with the flip of the result from either myself or you. Do you accept this deal and the conditions that have been presented? Yes, I accept, I reply immediately. Excellent. The bargain is struck. She smiles. You've been lucky 4 times already, Trevor. I can't hold out forever. I allow myself the faintest of smiles at the edges of my lips. I only need my luck to hold out for one more flip. This is the last time that I'll be making this deal. Oh, now that is interesting. Well, go on. What do you want to know? I tilt my head slightly. Tell me about the underlayers. Lydia is silent for a moment. Her expression has changed. It is usually playful with a slight hint of malice. Now it is unreadable. That's what you want to know? She asked in a voice just as guarded as her expression. Yes, I confirm. Let me remind you that the terms of our deal require you to do so. She considers me for another minute before nodding once. In just a moment, I'm going to state a truth, she begins. You are going to scoff at it, dismiss it as simple fiction, and call me a liar. You'll do this internally instead of speaking those thoughts to me so that you can continue to adhere to the usual social niceties. But the end result will be the same. You will not believe me. She leans forward. Most of you won't, anyway. There will be a small part of you that will question your own disbelief. Something about what I tell you will ring true, and it will stick with you long after our conversation. Somewhere deep down you will know that what I have said to you is the truth. This is because you have subconsciously felt it for a long time now. Maybe you've always felt it. All that I'm doing is putting into words what your species has instinctively known all this time. And what is this great revelation of yours, I prompt? This is a dying reality. I furrow my brow, but Lydia continues before I can say anything. This reality is a decaying carcass that hasn't yet realized that its time has come and gone. Tell me, Trevor, do you believe in God? What? I start to say. Not necessarily the Christian God, or the Muslim God, or any being that other religions base themselves around. I'm asking if you believe in a higher power that has a hand in the shaping of everything around you. I don't know, I answer honestly. There is a creator. I know this for a fact, as I am one of the few that has stood in the presence of the creator and has seen the creator's work. The creator is not God. The creator is so far beyond the concept of God that it's laughable. I stare at her silently. This is where the limits of human languages, as well as the limits of human understanding, come into play. It's awkward to speak of the creator without being able to use pronouns. The creator is not a he, or a she, or a they. The creator is simply the creator. I have to excuse the repetition involved in talking about the creator, as I'm going for accuracy over grammatic fluidity. I don't understand what this has to do with my question. We're interrupted as the waiter steps into view. Once again, he remains still and out of hearing range until I beckon him over. He walks over to the table and silently uncorks the wine bottle I had ordered before filling our glasses. He knows exactly how full of a glass I prefer, and he stops at precisely the right moment. He finishes his task and places the bottle within my reach. With a courteous nod, he leaves once again. Think of reality as a painting, Lydia says, absently running one finger over the rim of her glass. The painting is the result of the creator's brush strokes. Every single drop of paint has been painstakingly chosen to take its exact place as part of the entirety of the piece. Nothing exists outside the creator's design. Are you with me so far? I nod. When I say reality, I don't just mean this universe. The painting includes the vastness of the multiverse as well, not to mention offshoots and spaces that can't be comprehended by anyone but the creator. For the sake of putting a name to it, let's refer to this collective reality as a work. I'd say that fits nicely into the painting metaphor. The creators ensured that there's a place for everything and that everything is in its place. This is sounding like the typical creation story that a number of different cultures have, I point out. Lydia raises an eyebrow. Well, here's the part where things get interesting. As I said, this work is laid out exactly how the creator intended. The work, however, is flawed. I blink. How is that possible? It's because nothing can ever be perfect. That's something that's vexed the creator since the beginning. The creator believes that the creator can achieve perfection, but it has yet to happen. The creator will believe that the work has been perfected, but inevitably some particle making a larger particle will be an imperceptible distance away from where it should be, and the illusion of flawlessness shatters. But how The work will never be perfect because the creator is imperfect. That should scare the piss out of you. It certainly frightens me. The thought of the being that brought forth everything fucking up certainly wasn't a comforting one. When the creator finds a flaw in a work, the creator does not simply fix it. That would be the equivalent of plugging a small hole in a dam with your thumb while the entire structure is collapsing. Instead, the creator begins work on a new painting. How many times has this happened, I ask? There isn't a number that could possibly begin to give you an answer to that. In the end, it doesn't matter. Here's what does. When the creator creates a new work, the creator doesn't use a new canvas. It's painted right on top of the previous one. This has been done countless times in the past and will continue to be done countless times in the future. Much like the original painting is merely covered up by a new one when an artist paints over it, the works the creator has deemed failures still exist. They are left under the surface to slowly rot away. These abandoned works are what we call the underlayers. It's a lot to take in. I'm silent for a long moment as I analyze what she's told me. You said that this is a dying reality, I said slowly. That would imply that this reality is an underlayer. Very good, Lydia says approvingly. This work has been deemed a failure by the creator and has been buried under newer and equally flawed works. As abandoned works go, this is one of the more pleasant ones. I know it doesn't seem like that sometimes, but it is. It's much closer to the top than most other underlayers. That's relatively speaking, of course. There's still a whole lot of layers above us. Nicer in what way? You have to understand that some of these underlayers have been rotting away since long before the creation of this one. They're nothing but darkness and nightmares now. Very, very unpleasant, and that's coming from me of all people. I look at her closely. Tell me, is it possible to travel between these layers? She returns my look. You already know that it is. That's why you purchased that. Lydia points to the box on the table. You also know the Fatum Machina can only open doors to places on this layer, she continues on. That means that you believe you found a way around that limitation, a way for it to force open gates across the underlayers. We believe that we have, I say, knowing that there's no point in lying about it. We, she repeats. Ah yes, your associate, the one they call Mr. Gangley. I'll never understand why he uses that silly name. From what I understand, it started with other people calling him that when they thought he wasn't listening. He kept it because he found it amusing. Besides, his real name would bring a lot more attention if it got out. We're getting off topic here. I still have some time. She shrugs. True, although not much. Just like you're aware of the existence of the underlayers, many of them are aware of our layer. Some of them even attempt to come through the barrier separating layers, and a small number of those succeed. I call those breaches bleeds. You know, like paint bleeding through a covering. I roll my eyes. Clever. Tell me about the successes. They've been small in nature so far. Ancient shadows that turn children's performers into killers to amuse themselves. Monsters that lurk in the brief moment between awake and sleep. An unknown force that drives people to take their own lives. A constant whisper that convinces a woman to open the gateway to madness with a promise, the lie of eternal life. Those sorts of things. Nothing on the scale of what you're planning. I want the locations of where these bleeds originally happened. Your wish is my command, she replies sarcastically. I reach into my suit coat and remove a pen and a small pad of paper. I hand them to Lydia and watch as she opens the pad and begins to write down the information that I requested. There are more of them than I expected. I put the more severe bleeds at the top, she tells me as she finishes and slides the pad back over to me. I want to start with those if you're going to attempt what I think you are. And with that, my dear, your time is up. She's right. I can see the ball in Times Square lowering through the window behind her. It strikes the bottom, and lights begin to flash all around it. Another year gone. Another year come. I stand up and collect the box containing the Fatum Machina. Reaching down to pick up my glass, I raise it to my lips and slowly sip at the wine. The 1947 Cheval Blanc is considered one of the finest vintages ever produced, and it's easy to see why. It is thicker than I would have thought, but the flavors are bold and varied in ways that complement perfectly rather than distract from the overall presentation. This is to be my final drink. I can die assured that the last taste on my lips is the best. I put down the glass and turn away from the table. I have no interest in watching Lydia flip the coin. What will be, will be. I begin walking towards the hallway leading to the elevator. From behind me, I hear the sound of the coin spinning in the air just before it thumps onto the table. I reach the elevator. This is the 5th year in a row that the coin has come up my way. I quickly do the math in my head. There's only about a 3% chance of that happening. Some would call that luck. Some might call it fate, or maybe divine providence. I simply call it what was required. I don't take chances that I don't have to. I didn't get to where I am by being reckless. Each of these 5 gambles were necessary to get vital information. The elevator doors open. Now I have everything that I need, and it's time to get to work. That ending presents an interesting question, doesn't it? Is Trevor Morwood's continued survival because of the incredible luck? That ending presents an interesting question, doesn't it? Is Trevor Morwood's continued survival because of incredible luck? Or is it something larger at play that keeps his heart ticking? One thing is for certain, he's got a very large role to play in the story going forward. Speaking of questions, we've come to the part of the show where I have the pleasure of answering the questions that you wonderful viewers have sent in. You're a very curious bunch, and I enjoy hearing the sound of my own voice, so let's get to it. As always, we have our own mailman of sorts to deliver your questions. Neither rain, nor sleet, nor piles of gutted and ruined bodies shall stop him from making his rounds. He's the one, the only, Squeakers the Slaughtering Squirrel.
Hiya, lodgers. It's me, Squeakers, and I'm taking time out of my busy day of punishing and consuming the week to bring you today's viewer question. I hope you appreciate the sacrifice that I'm making, because if you don't, I might just have to make a different kind of sacrifice out of you.
You really shouldn't be talking to our viewers like that.
Cram it, shit for brains, and shut your mouth so I can read the question. I've got a lot of irons in the fire right now, and I can't hear the people on those irons screaming if I'm here with you. Today's question was posted on the YouTube community page and is from Still Mary. Today's question was posted on the YouTube community page and is from Still Mary. It says, and I quote, "Did you go to high school, college, graduate school? Background in writing, journalism, voice acting, voiceover?" Thanks for the question, Still Mary, and if you start hearing screaming coming from downstairs, be sure to just ignore it.
No, do not do that. If you hear screaming coming from downstairs, Still Mary, get out of the house. Squeakers is already inside if you're hearing the screaming. So for your question, did I go to high school? Yeah, I went to high school. I graduated from high school back in the days of yore in 1999. I did go to college from there. I did not graduate. I got fairly far along the track, but ended up not deciding to go through with that. This day I'm not 100% sure why I decided not to do it, but it's one of those things that when you're there and I could tell that it wasn't really for me and that I wanted to find a different path from it. So obviously I didn't graduate from college. I didn't go to graduate school. I do have a background in writing. I've been writing stories since, I think I wrote my first one when I was 4 or 5. Just kind of gone from there. In high school, I wrote my first novel, which basically got me into a lot of trouble. In my English course that I had, I want to say it was my sophomore year, we had a giant writing assignment that went throughout the entire year. And at the end of the year, we were supposed to turn in about 20
or so stories that were across different genres. Like there was fiction, there was nonfiction, there was like writing a journal entry, things along those lines. I made the mistake of writing the fiction story first, and then I kept going. So instead of turning in these 20 different stories, I set down an entire novel on my English teacher's desk. I don't know how I managed to pass. I still got a passing grade for it. I think he was just impressed that somebody just wrote a book and turned it in and then had the balls to go, you're getting this instead of your project. So that was when I wrote my first novel. And then all throughout high school and into college and beyond college, I submitted stories to various magazines and online publications. I've been published a number of times for that. I've had a couple of books published. They're all out of print now, I believe. Had a bunch of short stories on websites like creepypasta.com. Obviously, those are a lot easier to get on there than a submission story, but at the same time, they're all fairly highly rated, which I'm still pretty proud about. I actually think that a lot of people look down on sites like creepypasta.com when they really shouldn't, because the people reading those stories, that's the audience that you're trying to get this stuff in front of. I think some of the people that are on there are actually more knowledgeable about horror than the people in studios and publishing companies. So, yeah, and then I've also got a book that's going to be coming out soon in the Czech Republic of all places. That's going to be a children's horror book done sort of in the style of Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. So there's going to be illustrations. I haven't seen them yet, but from what I've seen from other things that have come out in that region, I expect them to be a little twisted, which I'm really looking forward to seeing. So I'm really looking forward to that coming out, even though I obviously won't be able to read it because I don't speak Czech. So thanks for the question, still, Mary, and I hope that answered it. And remember, if you start to hear that screaming come from downstairs, you really need to go. The other people in the house, it's too late for them. If you'd like to have your questions answered on Stories from Beyond the Dark, post them in the video comments. While I can't get to them all, I'm going to give it the old college try and get to as many as possible before this series ends at the end of July. Now, there's another question that I've been asked a few times since the first episode dropped that I like to address. As you likely already know, I'm one half of the Last Lodge founders. The other half is William Rayne, an extremely talented writer and someone that I'm very proud to call a friend. The question that keeps coming up, of course, is where exactly is William? Why isn't he co-hosting the show with me? The answer to that question is that William is an extremely busy man. He's constantly researching for the stories he creates, traveling around the world to learn everything that he can so he can translate that into new and exciting horror stories. So, while William is too busy to be here in person, his assistant Janine is always with him and has sent me a video of his latest adventure. I haven't seen this footage yet, so I'm excited to watch it along with you on this new segment that we're going to start calling Where in the World is William Rayne?
This is Janine, Mr. Rayne's assistant, and I'm reporting to you live on recording from Transylvania. Mr. Rayne is here to research vampires, and as everyone knows, there's no better place to do that than at Count Duckula's castle. Or maybe that's Count Dracula. I think Count Duckula was a duck, which makes sense because you've got to stay on brand. I think Dracula's the guy that looks like Greg or Gary or Carl Oldman or whatever his name is. Oh my, that was a frickin' panther that just ran after Mr. Rayne. I tell ya, he's wonderful with animals, just not bats. Bats are just flying pieces of old leather. Learn how to have wings, you filthy rodents. Okay, so now there's people coming out of the floor, which I completely get. When I'm into my third vodka spritzer, I'm the exact same way. Good, there's a door. This place is so fancy that I thought we were gonna get lost. Oh no, Mr. Rayne, don't eat that wall meat. It looks really old. Oh no, I ate the wall meat. Listen, I gotta go. There's gonna be mess everywhere.
That, folks, is pure dedication to one's craft. I'm truly lucky to be able to call him my partner in this whole venture. Earlier this year, we opened the doors of the Last Lodge, and to say it's been a wild ride so far would be a massive understatement. When we first came up with the idea of a living, breathing horror story universe, we knew that it was going to be a long road ahead of us. This is a massive project, and with only 2 of us working on it, there was no question that it was going to require a lot of creativity, a lot of work, and a lot of hours. This was a brand new world to us. We'd both been writing for many years, but when it came to things like narration and video editing, we were completely clueless. Everything that you've seen on this channel so far is a result of us slowly, and sometimes painfully, teaching ourselves the ropes. There's no question that we're still learning, but the absolutely incredible response from you viewers has driven us onward and upward. From the bottom of our hearts, we thank you for allowing us into your world each week, if even for a little while. We are committed to seeing our vision through and providing the best experience that we possibly can. To that end, we're excited to announce the opening of our very own Patreon. We want to be able to completely focus on bringing you new and exciting content, not just in the narration space, but in other spaces as well. We also want to be able to fully commit to the Last Lodge. Our ultimate goal is to get to a place where we can massively expand the amount and type of content that we provide to our viewers. Through the incredibly generous support of you viewers, we're hoping to be able to bring in new and up-to-date equipment to help us towards this goal, as well as eventually transition into a place in our lives where creating and releasing new content becomes our full-time careers. That's where Patreon comes in. To say thank you for your support, we'll be offering exclusive content to our supporters, with each tier bringing things that we hope you find fun and exciting. As the Last Lodge continues to grow, the benefits will only continue to grow as well. If you're able to, please consider supporting us through Patreon. We take your support seriously, and we'll be using it to grow, expand, and provide you with the best experience that we possibly can. With your help, the sky is truly the limit for the horror and horror-related content that we can create and offer. Please, check us out at patreon.com/thelast-lodge. If you're not able to be a Patreon at this time, don't worry. We're committed to always keeping our currently at least once a week content available to everyone on YouTube. Again, to everyone that's provided the positive messages that keep us going, and both the comments and critiques of the channel, thank you. You're the best community we could have ever hoped for, and we hope that you continue to enjoy what we're creating. And remember, now that the lodge doors are open, all things are possible. We've now come to the final narration for this evening, and it's a very personal one for me. Putting aside all the joking and fun we've been having, this story called All the Stars in the Sky came from a place deep inside me when I wrote it. When my youngest daughter was born, she was born prematurely. She was extremely small, and the first months of her life were spent in the NICU instead of with us. She was my wife and I's 3rd child, but she was the first to make me confront the very real possibility of losing a child. If you aren't a parent, or if you are, but your children have been thankfully safe and healthy throughout their lives, you can't understand what that feeling is like. I know that I couldn't before it was right up there in my face. While the details in the story are different from what actually happened in the life of my family, the same sense of impending loss and the inability to cope with that, those are present because they're present inside me. Typically when I write, I do so because it's fun and I enjoy entertaining people with my stories. All the Stars in the Sky is one of a handful of stories that were written because I just had to get them out of me. Even then, I had to bring a few old friends along when I did so. Our main character is about to find out that some prices are impossibly high, and yet those prices still have to be paid.
When my daughter Violet was born, I didn't have much to offer her. My wife and I both worked, but housing was expensive where we lived, and much of our income went towards renting our cramped 2-bedroom apartment. Owning our own home was still just a dream then. All the baby clothes and other items we got to prepare for Violet's birth had been purchased secondhand, and I had taken on a second job to make sure that we'd be able to afford formula and other necessities. The first time that I held Violet, I looked down at that little wrinkled face, and I just knew that any struggles in the coming days would be worth it. She was perfect, and she deserved a perfect life. I looked over at my wife Tara and smiled. Someday, I told her, I'm going to make sure this child has all the stars in the sky. When Violet was 5, she caught chickenpox from another child at a preschool. Because of this, she was required to stay home for 2 weeks while the infection ran its course. This was extremely hard on her. She was a very social child, and being apart from her friends for that long quickly began to take its toll. In an effort to raise her spirits, I stopped by a thrift store on the way home from work and purchased a telescope that I had seen a few days earlier. I set it up in her bedroom window and turned off the lights. She stared up into the clear night for hours, fascinated by the heavens and the things that filled it. When she finally went to bed, she snuggled into her pillow and asked me if someday she could go to space. I'm sure you will, I said to her. You'll fly right up to space and become the princess of all the stars in the sky. 2 years later, when Violet was lying in a bed in a pediatric cancer ward, I would visit her each evening after work and all day on the weekends. I would have spent every single moment with her if it had been possible, but I had to remain employed to be able to continue to afford our health insurance. Tara never left her side, though, so I was comforted that she was never alone. The cancer was aggressive, and while the doctors tried everything that they could, the disease continued to progress towards its inevitable conclusion. There's no preparing for the death of a child. My wife and I did our best to brace ourselves for what we knew was coming, but with each passing day we started to break down more and more. There were no more words of encouragement between us, no more promises that things were going to take a turn for the better. There was only silence as we sat next to Violet's bed, each of us holding one of her small hands as we watched the heart rate monitor. One day, the most terrible day that I've ever known, the lead doctor assigned to Violet's case told us that she had less than 24 hours. Something broke inside of me as he spoke, something that had been cracking apart the entire time that she had been in the hospital. Knowing that I couldn't go back into her room while I was in such a state, I went into the restroom at the far end of the ward hallway and locked myself inside one of the stalls. Pain and frustration and fear and 1,000 other emotions crashed down on me like a tidal wave, and I wept so hard that I was left gasping for air. After I finally got control of myself, I took several deep breaths before cleaning myself up with toilet paper. I left the stall and splashed cold water over my face at the sink. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror as I did so. The face that stared back at me looked old and tired, almost unrecognizable. A voice called my name from the bathroom entrance. I turned to find a well-groomed man dressed in a suit and tie standing there, a briefcase clutched in both hands. He was older than I was, although it was difficult to determine exactly how much older. He introduced himself as Silas Pembroke. He said that he represented a private scientist that had been working on radical treatments for terminal illnesses. His employer had heard of Violet's condition, and he believed that she was a perfect candidate for his program. The cost for the treatment would be high, Pembroke warned me, and if Violet were to receive it, I couldn't speak of it to anyone except my wife. It was cutting edge, but also not approved by the government. Tell me, Pembroke said as he raised his left eyebrow, what would you give for your daughter to live? Anything, I replied immediately. I'd give all the stars in the sky. That seemed to satisfy him. He told me that the scientist's assistant would be in touch shortly before he left the restroom. I didn't know exactly what I agreed to, but it really didn't matter. All that mattered was that there was one last chance for my daughter. There was no price too high for that. I told Tara about my encounter with the odd man. While she agreed that I had done the right thing, she seemed doubtful that anything would come from it. Normally I would have shared that sentiment, but there was something about Pembroke that made me believe that what he offered was legitimate. I knew that there was a very real possibility that I only believed that because I wanted it to be true. But false hope was better than no hope. An hour after the sun had set, a different man entered Violet's room. He was wearing a white lab coat, and he had a clipboard tucked under one arm. Despite how he was dressed, however, I could immediately tell that he wasn't a doctor. He greeted Tara and me with a smile and told us that his name was Peter Lewis. He was the assistant to the person that would be performing Violet's procedure. He told us that the scientist wished for his name to remain anonymous, and that one of the conditions of the procedure would be that we would not be allowed to be present for it. Neither would the hospital staff, and that had already been cleared with them. He didn't come right out and say it, but I got the impression that some strings had been pulled and that the staff agreeing hadn't really been voluntary. The subject then turned to payment. Lewis informed us that, while no monetary compensation was required, one or both of us would be asked to perform a number of tasks to assist with the scientist's research. Those tasks would be assigned whenever they were needed. When I asked what would happen if we weren't able to do what was asked of us, he bluntly informed me that what was being done to help Violet could easily be reversed. Although we weren't comfortable with the deal, we made it anyway. What other choice did we have? Lewis ushered us both out of the room towards a waiting area. As he did so, the overhead lights in the hallway began to turn off one by one. At first I thought there was a power outage, but after a moment I realized that the backup security lights weren't coming on. All of the lights were being shut off deliberately. I asked Lewis to explain what was going on. "It's necessary," Lewis said. He smiled a strange smile and his eyes grew distant, like he was recalling a long-forgotten memory. Mr. Gangley walks the halls. Before I could ask about what he said, he instructed us to sit in the waiting room and he would let us know when the procedure was over. Again, not having much of a choice, we did as we were told. The last of the lights on the floor went out, and the only illumination was the dim glow of computer monitors and various pieces of equipment in the hallway. Lewis was gone. I glanced up and noticed that the red light on a nearby security camera was off. I forced myself to look away. Tara and I had made our decision, and we were just going to have to stand by it no matter what happened. A door somewhere down the hallway from us slammed shut. Moments later, I heard sounds of footsteps approaching. Lewis appeared in the waiting room doorway. "Your assistance is required earlier than expected," he said, handing me a slip of paper before going back down the hall. Using the light from my cell phone, I examined the folded paper. It was made of parchment, and it was quite a bit thicker than a standard piece of paper. Tara watched silently as I unfolded it. The message inside was written in exquisite calligraphy. "Please be so kind as to travel down to the morgue and retrieve the lungs of one Miss Caroline Tafford." I read this sentence over and over again. While the message was simple enough to understand, my brain just couldn't seem to process what it was instructing me to do. Just the thought of it was enough to make my skin crawl and my blood run cold. It was Tara that brought things back into focus. She had always been the practical one in a relationship, and that practicality was on full display now. Rather than concentrating on the tasks detailed in the note, she instead reminded me that, Mere hours earlier, we had agreed to do whatever was required of us to give Violet one last chance of being able to grow up. Unless we were willing to let her go, to let our baby girl die, we needed to stick to that agreement. She took a deep breath before volunteering to be the one to do it. I couldn't let her. Despite my own misgivings, I wasn't about to allow her to take the risk. What the note was asking was disgusting, yes, but it was also highly illegal. If she got caught trying to steal body parts from a corpse, she would go to jail. It was better if I was the one to do it. She tried to argue, saying that we were in our marriage together and Violet was our child. If anything, it would be safer for us to do it together. We could watch out for each other. I just shook my head and pointed out that if we both got in trouble, there would be no one there for Violet if she survived the procedure. She had no answer to that, and she had to give in. Deciding that I needed to get going before I talked myself out of what needed to be done, I left the waiting room and went out into the dark hallway. As I was crossing over the door leading to the stairwell, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. It was gone by the time that I had turned towards it. I frowned. The deep shadows made it difficult to be sure, but I would have sworn that I had seen a thin and tall figure, so tall that it almost touched the ceiling. Nothing else happened while I watched, however, so I dismissed it as my eyes playing tricks on me. I went to the stairwell and started descending the stairs towards the ground level. There was a map of the hospital near the main desk in the lobby, and I hoped that it showed where the morgue was. That was the extent of the plan that I had formed. I had no idea what I was doing. It turned out that I didn't even need to go into the lobby. When I reached the ground floor, there was a floor listing attached to the wall near the door. The morgue was listed as being located in the first sub-level. I continued down the stairs to my destination. The hallway was quiet when I exited the stairwell. I stood still for a long time, straining my ears in an effort to determine if anyone was nearby. There was only silence. It seemed strange that there wasn't anyone around. Then I remembered what time it was. Most of the staff had left for the day, leaving just the people assigned to the night shift. The first door that I passed had a sign stating it was a locker room. The beginnings of an idea began to form in my mind. I opened the door slightly and peered in. It looked empty. With one last glance over my shoulder, I went inside. I went over to the bank of lockers and started trying to open them one by one. Most of them were locked, and the few that weren't didn't have anything inside. There was a second group on the other side of the room, and I hurried over to those and tried them as well. I was almost out of lockers when I found what I was looking for, one that opened and contained a set of scrubs. I quickly changed into them, putting my own clothes into the locker. They were large on me, but not so much that someone would immediately notice. I closed the locker door and made sure that the lock didn't engage. Leaving the locker room, I continued down the hallway until I reached a supply closet. I opened it and rummaged around inside until I produced a mask, a surgeon cap, gloves, and shoe coverings. I put them all on and shut the closet door. As I did so, I saw the security camera at the end of the hall and froze. Even if I didn't run into anyone during the task that had been given to me, there would be footage of me in the sub-level halls. There was no way that I'd be able to get away with this. I felt panic beginning to rise in me. That panic subsided slightly when I noticed that the light on the security camera was off, just like the one back up on the third floor had been. I frowned and looked around. There was another camera above and to my left. It was shut off as well. No chance that this was just a coincidence. Still, there wasn't time to think about it. I walked down the hall and followed a series of signs towards the hospital morgue. I didn't pass anyone, and I started to feel a bit more confident that I'd be able to do what I needed to without getting caught. I eventually reached the door I was looking for and, after a quick check to make sure there was no one inside, I entered and slowly closed the door behind me. The room was larger than I was thinking it would be. A line of 4 gurneys were neatly arranged in the center of a gray-tiled floor. A series of silver sinks were attached to the wall to my right, and above those were large light boxes that glowed white. 3 metal tables were bolted to the ground. Various pieces of equipment were attached to these tables, and lights hooked to movable arms hung from the ceiling above them. A tray with small medical instruments was positioned next to each one. It was a wall on the far side of the room that held my attention, however. Square cabinets, stacked 3 high and 10 across, were inserted into the wall. The doors were all closed. Each of them was numbered, and there were identification tags posted on a number of them. I had seen enough medical dramas on television to know that this is where the dead bodies were stored. I looked back at the door that I had entered through. This was likely my last chance to turn back. I returned my attention to the cabinets and set my jaw. That wasn't really an option. Violet deserved her chance to live. I crossed over to the drawers and took the note out of my pocket to verify the name of the person that I was looking for. Carolyn Tafford. I slowly examined each of the identification tags in turn, making my way down the wall as I searched for the correct one. When I reached the end, though, I still hadn't found it. I went through the tags 2 more times just to be sure. There wasn't anyone with either the same first or last name as the body I needed to find. "Can I help you?" a voice said from behind me. I'd been so engrossed in my search that I hadn't heard the door open. Reminding myself that my face was hidden behind the mask, I turned towards the speaker. A woman in her early to mid-20s was standing in the doorway. She was dressed in the same type of blue scrubs that I was, and she was wearing a lab coat over them. Her blonde hair was tied back in a ponytail. She was regarding me with a curious expression on her face. Thinking fast, I told her that I had been sent down to retrieve a blood sample from one of the bodies in storage. I surprised myself with how easy the lie came to me. I was even more surprised that the woman smiled and nodded. "Let me give you a hand," she said as she walked over to me. "Dr. Gooding's filing and cataloging system can be a bit of a nightmare. Who are you looking for?" I answered her with a name that I had seen on one of the identification tags. As I did so, my eyes were drawn to the name tag that was pinned to the front pocket of her lab coat. I had to restrain myself from reacting. Written in blue letters was the name Carly Tafford. I hadn't been sent to retrieve the organs of a dead person. I was there to collect the lungs of someone that was still very much alive. I knew immediately that I couldn't do this. I was being asked to commit murder. That was going way too far. I mentally began to try to work out how to get out of the morgue without raising any suspicions. An image of Violet sleeping in her hospital bed with tubes sticking out of her came unbidden into my head. Bit my bottom lip as I watched the woman open one of the doors on the wall. One thought kept repeating itself over and over. Either she died, or my little girl did. As she turned her back to me to start to roll out the body on its metal tray, I reached over to one of the instrument tables and grabbed a scalpel. I quickly closed the distance between us, clamped my hand over her mouth, and pierced her neck with the blade. I pulled hard, and it slid across her throat with surprising ease. She tried to struggle against me, but it was much too late. Blood poured out of the long incision. I closed my eyes and kept my arms wrapped around her until the last of the fight was gone. Her body leaned up against me, and I slowly lowered her down to the floor. She looked up at me in fear and confusion as the light faded from her eyes. I had done it. I had actually killed someone. I stared down at the woman's body for a long moment before rushing over to a sink, ripping off my mask, and heaving up the contents of my stomach. I knew that I wasn't done. Killing her had only been the first step. I used the sprayer attached to the sink to wash my vomit down the drain. Putting the mask back on, I went over to the body and somehow managed to hoist it up onto the nearest table. It wasn't easy. She couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, but trying to maneuver even that little dead weight was extremely difficult. The next hour was the worst of my life. I had no medical training, and I certainly didn't know anything about harvesting organs. While the tools that were needed to remove the lungs were all there, I didn't know the proper way to use them. The result was a horrifically mutilated body. It made me sick to think about what I'd done to this poor woman that hadn't deserved this desecration. I kept expecting the morgue door to open as I worked, but it never did. Apparently the woman had been the only one assigned to that shift, or at least the only one actively working in this section of the hospital. That's how I forced myself to think of her, the woman. I couldn't afford to refer to her by name, not even in my own thoughts. That would only serve to remind me that she had been a living person, someone with feelings and desires and a family. It was better to dehumanize her in my mind. It was the only way that I managed to get through my grisly task. When I had finally cut the lungs out of the woman's chest, I looked around the room for someone to put them in. I spotted a portable cooler in one corner of the room and retrieved it. It was marked for use to carry organs for transplanting. It would have been funny if I hadn't been so shaken and disgusted at the horrible act I had just performed. I placed the lungs inside. They were surprisingly heavy. There was no way to hide what I had done. Gore was everywhere. I went over to the door and at the last second stopped myself from opening it. Just like the room, I was covered in blood. I went into the hallway dressed in these clothes. I was going to leave a trail. I stripped off the scrubs and balled them up along with the mask, cap, and shoe coverings. With a bundle under one arm and the cooler under the other, I went out into the hallway barely clothed and hurried back to the locker room. I quickly used one of the showers to rinse off my body before getting dressed. The entire process only took about 5 minutes, but every second that passed was one moment closer to when the woman's body would be discovered. I finished dressing and looked at the ball of clothing sitting on the floor in front of the locker. I didn't know what to do with it. When the police were inevitably called, they would do a thorough search of the hospital. That meant that just throwing the scrubs into the trash wouldn't work. I couldn't think of anywhere to hide them where they wouldn't be discovered. The locker room door opened, and I felt my heart skip a beat. To my surprise, the man from upstairs, Lewis, entered the room. He nodded once as he looked me up and down. "Are the items in that cooler?" he asked. "Yes," I told him, my voice sounding weak in my own ears. "Good. You should head back upstairs to be with your wife and daughter. I'll take care of those." He motioned at the scrubs with his chin. "Leave the cooler here, too." "Violet..." He smiled slightly. "She's going to be just fine. The procedure is finished, and it was a complete success. As long as you keep up your end of the bargain, she'll live a long and happy life." Violet did indeed make a full recovery. To this day, there's been no further sign of cancer, and if anything, she's healthier than she's ever been. Her doctors are at a complete loss to explain it. The term miracle has been thrown around a lot, but Tara and I know better. It wasn't any divine intervention that saved her. It was a dark deal made with the dark devil. I was never so much questioned about the death of Carolyn Carly Tafford. During the past 2 years, we've received 3 more of the finely written notes on parchment. Each of them has been hand-delivered to us by Pembroke, the man who had first approached me in the restroom. I don't know for sure why it's always him, but from what I've been able to piece together, I think he handles certain types of business for the anonymous scientist. Apparently, that includes messenger duty. Each of the tasks has been as bad as, if not worse, than the one that I had to perform in the hospital. Despite Tara's objections, I've done them all myself. I don't want her hands to be dirty like mine are. I'd love her too much for that. The worst part about the tasks, the part that really keeps me up at night, is that they're getting easier. Not the acts themselves, but convincing myself to perform them. I'm becoming accustomed to the killing. I'm not enjoying them. I'm not some kind of psychopath. It's just... I don't have the voice in the back of my head acting as my conscience anymore. I've changed in some fundamental way that I can't explain. Even if I still had any internal crisis about what I'm doing, I would just have to look at Violet going about her life to silence it. Being able to watch her grow up instead of dying scared in that hospital bed makes everything worth it. Some people may say that one child's life isn't worth the taking of many others. Those people have never faced the certainty of losing their child before. No matter what Violet's mystery benefactor requests of me, I'll do it. I'll be the butcher that it requires me to be. for my daughter, I'll keep killing until blood stains all the stars in the sky.
That's all we've got for you tonight. From everybody here at Stories from Beyond the Dark, thank you for supporting The Last Lodge. And seriously, if you hear screaming from downstairs and the pattering of squirrel paws in the stairs, it's too late for your family. Just get the hell out of the house. Good night, Lodgers.